right, welcome, Spreadsheet Geek here. In this quick tutorial, I'm going to show you some useful summary data with some functions for average, max, and min. I've already covered the sum function in another tutorial. So this should go over how to do some other summary data. So what I've got here, I've got a spreadsheet set up that has some students' grades. They have labs, they have quizzes, they have tests, more labs, more quizzes, more tests, more labs, more quizzes, more tests. So if I'm the teacher or if I'm the student, maybe I want to look at some of these summary statistics to get a good idea about maybe how students are doing or how some of these labs and tests and quizzes are being scored. So I've already talked about using the sum. So if I wanted to add up the total scores on lab 1, I could find my sum function over here. It might be under your triple dots. I could use functions and use sum. And then it's waiting for me, and I could highlight those cells that I want to add up, B3 through B8, hit the enter key, and it shows that there were a total of 44 points earned on that lab. That's not really a terribly useful number. The more students, the more points I would probably have. Probably a better summary stat here is average. So average is another function that's under your functions option here. I'm going to pick average, and it works pretty much the same as the sum function. It's waiting for me to highlight the cells that I want to take the average of. I want to take the average of all the labs, but when I highlight these, I'm going to be careful not to include the total because that would throw my average way off. It would double my average. So I'm just going to highlight cells B3 through B8 again. Sorry, B3 through B8, not B9, and I'm going to hit enter. So that shows me that the average score on that lab was 7.33. The highest score, to get the highest score, I could use the max function and highlight these cells again, B3 through B8, and hit enter. Now it shows me that the highest score was 9, which is really easy to see. I can look at these 6 cells and I can see pretty easily that the highest score is 9. So I could have just typed a 9 here. Instead of doing the max, I could have just typed a 9, and I'll have a lot of students that will do that. But that's not a good way to do it because let's say that Haley comes up to the teacher after the quiz and says, hey, you accidentally marked number 3 wrong and I got number 3 right, and the teacher says, oh, my mistake, and they fix that and change that to a 10 for Haley. Now you'll notice that my average changed because this data changed, but my highest score still shows up being a 9, and that's not the highest score anymore. The highest score is 10, so I would have to go back and change this to a 10 as well to reflect the now that my highest score is a perfect score of 10. Instead, if you do use the max and you highlight those cells, B3 through B8, and hit enter, now my highest score is 10, but let's say that Haley's score actually wasn't right, that she really didn't get number 3 right that she said she did, and I change that to a 9, my highest score changes to 9 automatically. So you want to use that max function. I know that it's easy to look and see what the highest score is, but you should always use the max function because if your data changes, that highest score might change as well, and we want that to be reflected automatically. We don't have to want to think to do it. The lowest score, I can use the min function, and I can highlight those cells, B3 through B8, hit enter, and it shows me that my lowest score is 5. But once again, if Kaylee were to come up to me and say that I got number 7 right, and I did make a mistake and change her score to a 6, that 5 automatically changes to a 6. So when you use functions instead of just looking at the cells, it does make a difference. And so you should always try to use functions when you're looking for highs and lows and maxes and mins. So I could keep doing that. I could do the sum here and highlight these cells. I could do the average here and highlight these cells, C3 through C8. I could do the max here and highlight C3 through C8, and I could do the min here and highlight C3 through C8, and I could repeat. But you can also use the fill handle because so many of these are going to be pretty much the same. If I take the function that I've done right in cell C9 and I grab that little circle in the bottom right corner and drag it to the right, that will just repeat that function, change the cell references, but it'll come up with the totals for all those. I can do the same thing for average, grab the fill handle and drag it to the right. I can even do more than one at once. So if I were to highlight highest and lowest, that whole range gets a fill handle, and I could grab that and do both of those at the same time. So that's a lot quicker way to do it. Um, another thing is that another way to use this is that you might want to come up over here. I have like average lab. So I want to figure out what Ethan's average lab score was. So for this one, I could also do the average. But instead of highlighting all of these, I don't want to do that because I don't want to include the tests and quizzes. This is just for lab. So then I could highlight one value at a time, lab 1, comma, lab 2, comma, lab 3, comma, lab 4, comma, lab 5, comma, lab 6. So that just takes the average of those 6 numbers. Instead of a whole range, it says average those 6 cells together. If I hit enter, it should show me that Ethan's average lab was 8.33. Now it's going to suggest an autofill. You should always think about this. Is it going to be the same for all of the rest of these? In this case, it is, so I'm going to accept this, but you should never just check this right away. This is only a guess, and sometimes it's wrong. So you should always think about this instead of just automatically accepting it. In this case, it's okay. So I'm going to check that, and it's going to use that same function for all of them. If I want to do the highest lab, this is going to be a max function to find the highest. But in this case, I'm only looking at labs. So lab 1, comma, lab 2, comma, lab 3, comma, lab 4, lab 5, and lab 6. So I'm only looking at the labs for the highest lab, and Ethan's highest lab was a 10. Do I want to do that same thing for everybody else? Yes, I do. And then for the low lab, I'm going to do the min function. And once again, I'm only doing the labs. So lab 1, lab 2, lab 3, lab 4, lab 5, and lab 6. Enter. Autofill is okay here. And then you could do that same sort of thing for quizzes. Average quiz, I could do an average function, and I could do quiz 1, comma, quiz 2, comma, and quiz 3. So it's only taking the average of those 3 numbers. Autofill is okay here, so I'm going to say yes. When I do that autofill, I do lose my borders, so you have to decide whether it's worth it to do the autofill and then fix the borders later. It probably is, but I'm going to add my bottom border back into those so that it does divide those up. You see a lot of numbers here that are showing a bunch of decimal places. What you might want to do for all of these numbers that have far too many decimal places is you might want to highlight all of those, and you might want to reduce down to maybe just one decimal place. Oh, sorry. One decimal place. I reduced all of them and then increased to one decimal place. So you might want to do that for all of these averages that are going to give you a bunch of decimal places. If you want to do them all at once, you can highlight, for instance, I know that I'm going to have averages here in column N. I know I'm going to hold control down, and I'm going to highlight column Q and column T because I know all of those are likely to turn into a bunch of decimal places. So I can reduce all of those down to one decimal place, which makes more sense for an average here. Also, another way to do this, if you don't want to use this functions icon, you can also just type in functions. And once you've used them a number of times, you might find that it's easier to just type them in. And there are some nice things in Google Sheets and Excel as far as typing them in. So, for instance, right here, I've got the word total. If I type equals, it's kind of checking out what I got going on, and it thinks it's guessing, and it might be wrong, but in this case it's right. It's guessing that I want to add cells B3 through B8. This is the same function that I had there before, but I didn't have to go through the menu. I didn't have to highlight the cells. I can just hit enter. For average, if I type equals, it's seeing average right there, and it's guessing because of how I set it up that I want to take the average of B3 through B8, and that's great. I'm going to hit enter. If I got highest score equals, once again, because of how I've set it up, it's guessing that I want the max, and that's great. And for lowest score, it's going to guess that I want the min. So if you start to get good at typing in, remembering what the names of those functions are, just typing the equal sign a lot of times can get you a good suggestion. Instead of going through that menu, it is a little bit faster. And I find that since I've worked with spreadsheets a lot, I do tend to just type the function in instead of using the functions icon. So if you've just typed those in and you have all 4 of them done and they're right, and the rest of them are going to be pretty much the same, I can just grab that, highlight that whole section, grab that fill handle, and go all the way to the right. So that covers some uses of the average function, the max function, and the min function. We've already used the totals function. I don't think it's terribly useful in this particular spreadsheet, but I do think these other statistics, these other summary statistics are more useful. I could finish this out, but it's just going to be more of the same. So hopefully this video is helpful and shows you some uses of the max, min, and average function. If you like it, feel free to share it. If you subscribe, you're going to see a lot more videos that go over other spreadsheet magic and tips and tricks. So I'd appreciate it. Hope you enjoy. Happy spreadsheeting. Good luck.